Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us remotely, we have Frank Slootman. He's the CEO of Snowflake, as well as Mark Gibbas, President and CEO of WeatherSource. We're going to discuss COVID-19 data sets and how they can be used. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Frank, we'll kick it off with you. Snowflake recently launched a free public COVID-19 data set on the Snowflake Data Exchange in partnership with Schema, a data company. Tell us what this data set is and why it's important.
Yeah, the data set represents incredibly detailed incident data on COVID-19. And this data set is, as you said, is available on the Snowflake Public Data Exchange. And that means that anybody with a Snowflake account can access that data. It is analytics ready, it's structured, it's curated, it can immediately be used, and people use it to join it with internal operating data and so on. So the great thing about it is the level of detail. Typically what you see are high-level static views of data, and this just drills down to county level and city level and allows people to really interrogate that data at a very, very detailed level.
All right, and Mark, WeatherSource, a company providing weather and climate technologies for business intelligence, is also using the Schema COVID-19 data set on the Snowflake Data Exchange. Mark, how is WeatherSource using this data?
Yeah, that's a great question. What would a weather company want with access to COVID-19 data for? Well, a while ago, we've learned that there were a number of research groups who found evidence that there was a link between weather and the transmission rate of COVID-19. So with that knowledge, our data science teams have been accessing the Schema data on Snowflake and mashing this up with our on-point weather, which is also on Snowflake. A little bit about on-point weather. It's an on-demand, high-resolution global continuum of past, present, and forecast weather. So it's a great data set to be able to match up with something like the Schema data set. Anyway, our researchers were able to do that, and they were able to validate many of the findings that some of the other research groups have come across, which was that weather does have a substantial relationship to the transmission rate. And in particularly, it looks like the transmission rate increases during cooler and drier conditions. Now, to be clear, there are many factors that affect the transmission rate. I think the best way to think about this is, there's always going to be this normal baseline transmission rate, but during cooler and drier conditions, this normal transmission rate gets a boost from the weather.
Okay, and Frank, how is the Snowflake Data Exchange enabling access to this data set?
Well, any Snowflake account holder, Snowflake user has instant access to the data on our public data exchange. So WeatherSource has been a data partner with us since the beginning. So a lot of Snowflake users are already users of WeatherSource and know how to access it. The Schema COVID-19 data is relatively new of the last 2 weeks. So the ability to now combine these two data sets, that's really what the data science teams live for, because they want to enrich their models and become more descriptive and more predictive of the behavior that they're trying to understand.
All right, and Mark, with this visual that we're looking at now, specific to the United States, what is the data telling you? How does this forecast look? And what other data source are you planning to add to the model?
Yeah, another great question. Thanks. The data explains a lot as to why we're seeing stronger transmission in some areas rather than others. I know you're looking at a U.S. map right now, but when we looked at the Wuhan case, we saw that the ideal conditions for weather were present during November and December, and that kind of gave them an opportunity to really get started with aggressive transmission rates. And then in the U.S., we see that in the New York City area, there were persistent conditions that were cooler and drier that really kind of set up New York for being kind of an epicenter of what was the fast transmission that was happening there. But you look at other places like Sydney, Australia, while they have had plenty of transmission, the rate was not as robust as in places that were cooler and drier. As far as another data set we're looking to look at is, and this is also on Snowflake, from the Airline Reporting Corporation, or better known as ARC. They have data which can provide us information on how all of the various cities connect with flights. And we think by taking that into account, we can tighten up our analysis by understanding how and when the virus was brought to cities around the world.
And Frank, how is this data set being used by organizations, and what kind of demand are you seeing for this type of data, and what industries are most interested?
So the COVID-19 set certainly was an inflection point for us. There was just an overwhelming demand for it, but it's not just the interest in COVID data by itself. It's the ability to augment it with weather data, as we're discussing here, with flight arrival data, with supply chain data, with internal operating data. So the more the data scientists can combine and augment data, the more descriptive their models become, and that's really what this is all about.
And Frank, to follow on, what other type of COVID-19 related data are organizations asking for?
Well, economic data. In other words, people are trying to see inflections, accelerations, decelerations in specific geographies, and then map that against economic data. And people are looking to invest or de-invest, as the case may be. So that's obviously very common. We see restaurants trying to predict demand based on COVID data combined with demographic data, for example. So it's the ability to combine and augment data is what creates these explosive insights. And because COVID has been such a monkey wrench in the whole data mix, it's a very important data set to bring in here and combine with data like Weather Source.
Yeah, that's certainly valuable to the investment community. And Mark, we'll wrap with you. Weather Source is also providing weather data on the Snowflake Data Exchange. Tell us about this data set.
Yeah, happy to do so. It was really wonderful that the star schema data set was made available for free in the Snowflake Data Exchange. And to help build on this, Weather Source is providing access to our global data to match up with the star schema data set. So researchers will have access to the global weather data for nearly 6 million postal codes around the world. And we are hoping that by making this available for free, that researchers will continue to find links between weather and transmission rates, and that will benefit people and economies around the world.
All right, Frank Slootman, Mark Gibbas, thank you so much for joining us on Trade Talks.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jill.
All right, and thank you for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.